There is a silence you learn to keep, not a silence of emptiness, but one filled with a constant, humming vigilance. It is the silence of a held breath, a suppressed need, a carefully edited thought. You feel it in the slight tension before you speak, in the invisible weight of another's expectation. This is not merely a habit. It is an architecture of the self, built over a lifetime with a foundation laid in a place you can barely remember, by hands you were born to trust. It is the quiet, enduring legacy of a childhood spent learning that your safety, your worth, your very right to occupy space was conditional upon your ability to please. It did not begin with a command. It was never so direct. No parent in all likelihood sat their child down and said, "Your purpose is to make me happy." The instruction was far more elegant and therefore far more enduring. It was woven into the very fabric of daily life, a silent curriculum taught in a classroom without walls. Consider the landscape of a childhood, not as a series of events, but as an emotional atmosphere. A parent's sigh, heavy with a disappointment too complex to name, when a child's exuberance became too loud, the way a smile could vanish from a mother's face, replaced by a distant, preoccupied silence, because a grade was not perfect, a room was not tidy, and emotion was inconvenient. The child, a master cartographer of the parental heart, begins to draw a map. They learn that the terrain of love is unstable, certain paths being quiet, being helpful, achieving, agreeing, led to the warm sun of approval, other paths being needy, being angry, being different, led into a cold shadow. The blueprint is drafted not in words but in the body, a flinch, a tightened jaw, a hug that feels different depending on the day. This is where the foundation is poured. The child's developing mind, a brilliant and adaptive system, makes a series of calculations for which it has no other tools. It is a matter of psychological physics. For a child, parental love is synonymous with safety. To risk that love is to risk annihilation. Therefore, the self must be curated, the messy, authentic, fluctuating self, with its sudden tears, its irrational fears, its boundless anger, becomes a liability. It is folded and tucked away, a secret document too dangerous for the world. In its place, a more agreeable portrait is presented. A child learns to scan a room upon entering, to read the micro-expressions on the faces of the giants who hold their world in their hands. They become a junior psychologist, an emotional early warning system, dedicated to maintaining a peace they can never truly control. One does not learn to people please through dramatic punishments necessarily. Often, it is the language of subtle withdrawal that is most potent, the conversation that ends abruptly, the hug that isn't offered, the phrase "I'm fine" spoken in a tone that communicates quite the opposite. The child is presented with an emotional puzzle they are desperate to solve. Their own feelings, sadness, confusion, hurt, become irrelevant. In the face of this primary task, restore the caregiver to a state of contentment. The child's emotional world becomes a satellite, its orbit entirely determined by the gravitational pull of the parent's mood. Their own center of gravity is never formed. And so a core belief is born, as intimate and unquestioned as the air one breathes. My worth is not inherent, it is earned. It is a performance, and the audience must be pleased. This is the silent contract signed in a child's heart. It is the genesis of the apologetic smile when they have done nothing wrong, the immediate yes that arrives before the brain has even processed the request, the relentless internal audit that runs constantly. Are they comfortable? Are they happy with me? Did I do enough? This is the blueprint, a design for a life lived in the reflection of others' eyes, a structure built so early and so well that, for decades, it is mistaken for the sky itself. The child does not call it a transaction. For them, it is the fundamental logic of the universe, as real as gravity. If I am good, I am loved. If I am quiet, I am safe. If I am helpful, I belong. Love, that most sacred and unconditional of ideals, is slowly, systematically transformed into a currency, and the child becomes an earnest, desperate economist in a market with ever-fluctuating rates. This is the psychological mechanism that hardens the blueprint into a permanent structure. The developing brain, a marvel of neuroplasticity, begins to forge and Reinforce specific pathways, the neural connection between expressing a need and experiencing emotional distance becomes a well-worn superhighway of anxiety. Conversely, the pathway linking compliance and receiving a reward, a smile, a pat on the head, a moment of peace, is bathed in the reinforcing chemicals of relief. This is not a conscious decision. It is operant conditioning in its most intimate form, where the stakes are the highest imaginable, the connection to one's source of life, the self, is partitioned, the good child, the pleasing, manageable, high-achieving child, is brought forward for display, the rest, the angry, the jealous, the tired, the fearful, is relegated to the shadows, a secret self the world must never see. The currency takes many forms and each family mints its own. In one home it is achievement, a report card becomes a ledger, where an A is a deposit into the account of parental pride and a B is a concerning withdrawal. In another, it is emotional caretaking. The child learns to become a tiny therapist, soothing a parent's worries, mediating their conflicts, absorbing their frustrations. Their own childhood worries have no place here. There is only room for one set of anxieties, and they are not the child's. In still other homes, the currency is simply invisibility, not causing trouble, not having needs that are too loud, too expensive, or too complex. The most valuable thing the child can offer is their silence. This system creates a profound and lasting confusion. The child, and later the adult, can no longer distinguish between love and approval. They become synonymous. To be loved is to be approved of. Therefore, any withdrawal of approval feels like a terrifying annihilation of love itself. This is the engine of the panic that flares when a boss seems displeased, when a partner is quiet, when a friend cancels a plan. It is not merely about the present moment. It is a neurological flashback to that primal terror of being emotionally abandoned by the ones who held your world together. The adult mind may understand the irrationality, but the nervous system, trained over a lifetime, reacts with the same emergency protocol it learned in childhood: fix it, appease, restore the balance, make another deposit, whatever the cost. And the cost is the self. Every transaction, every strategic suppression of a need, every performed agreement spends a little of one's own authenticity. The internal world becomes a foreign country, its language forgotten, its landscapes unexplored. The focus is perpetually external. What do they need? What do they want? How can I provide it? The question, what do I need, becomes not just difficult to answer, but dangerous to even ask. It is the first step toward bankruptcy in the only system of value they have ever known. The currency of love, they come to suspect, is a currency that cannot be spent on oneself. The mind can be persuaded. It can learn new facts, absorb new philosophies. It can read books that say your worth is inherent and can intellectually agree. But the body keeps a more honest record. It speaks in a language of chemistry and electricity, of tension and tremor, a language learned long before words. The need to please is not a thought, it is a physiological event. It begins as a subtle shift, a distant tremor in the ecosystem of the self. A text message arrives marked with a period instead of an emoji. A colleague's tone in a meeting is a fraction of a degree cooler than usual. A partner is quiet during dinner. For most, these are minor social data points. For the people pleaser, they are a five-alarm fire in the nervous system. The amygdala, the brain's ancient sentinel, screams a warning that is not a word but a wave: danger, disconnection imminent. The adrenal glands answer the call. A surge of cortisol and adrenaline floods the bloodstream. The heart, now a frantic drum, hammers against the ribs. The breath becomes shallow, held high in the chest, as if preparing for a blow. The gut, that second brain, tightens into a hard, anxious knot. This is the echo. The body is reliving the childhood catastrophe of a parent's disapproval, responding to a social slight with the same full-throttle survival urgency as it would to a physical threat. This is the somatic imprint of the old blueprint. The muscles themselves have memorized the posture of appeasement. The shoulders curve forward slightly, making The body smaller, less threatening, the chin tilts down, the eyes become radar dishes, constantly scanning for micro-expressions of discontent in the faces of others. There is a constant low-level hum of vigilance, a background program running ceaselessly, draining the battery of the spirit. It is a state of hyperarousal disguised as agreeability. The smile is on, but the body is on alert. The voice is calm, but the palms are damp. This is the exhausting paradox. The performance of calm requires a tremendous output of physiological stress. The echo grows louder when the moment arrives to set a boundary, to express a contrary opinion, to simply say no. The body does not register this as an act of healthy self-assertion. It interprets it as a profound and terrifying risk. The internal systems go into revolt. The mind might be clear, this is a reasonable request, I have a right to my time, but the body is in mutiny. The heart pounds as if facing a predator. A metallic taste of fear coats the tongue. A wave of heat or a sudden chill passes through the skin. This is the somatic memory of the old punishment, the emotional withdrawal, the cold silence, the sense of having fallen from grace. The body, in its profound wisdom, is trying to protect its owner from that ancient pain by screaming for retreat, for compliance, for peace at any cost. To say no is to consciously override a deep biological imperative for safety. It feels, quite literally, like risking one's life. This is why intellectual understanding is never enough. The knowledge is in the head, but the terror is in the cells, in the muscles, in the very rhythm of the pulse. The healing then must also be physical. It must be about listening to this echo not as a command to be obeyed, but as a story to be heard. It is about feeling the clutch in the stomach and, instead of immediately moving to placate its source, simply breathing into the tightness. It is about noticing the frantic heart and placing a hand on the chest, a quiet, physical reassurance that this is an echo, not a current event. The body must be taught slowly and patiently that a no will not result in annihilation, that the disapproval of another is not a seismic event, but a passing weather pattern in a sky that remains itself intact. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that does not come from labor, but from performance. It is the fatigue of maintaining a facade, of holding a pose for a lifetime. From the outside, the people-pleaser's world often looks serene, orderly, even admirable. They are the reliable one, the agreeable one, the one who never makes a fuss. But inside that museum of quiet compliance, a war is being waged. This is the central conflict, the desperate, unsustainable effort to maintain external harmony at the cost of an internal civil war. The prison is built of golden bars, the approval of others, the tangible proof. Successful performance feels like freedom. Each thank you, each you're so easy to be. With each I don't know what I'd do without you is a key that momentarily unlocks a feeling of worth, but the door remains shut, because with every act of self-erasure, the internal self, the one with its own desires, opinions, and needs, grows more desperate. And alienated, a quiet, seeping resentment begins to pool. It is not directed at first at the people making the requests. It is directed inward at the self for its own weakness, its own inability to just be. This resentment is the prisoner turning on itself, rattling the bars of its own making. The conflict is paralyzing. To speak up is to risk the terrifying chaos of conflict and disapproval. To stay silent is to endure the slow erosion of the soul. The warden of this prison is not a person, it is a belief system. It is the unshakable conviction that to be loved, one must be effortless, that one's needs are a burden, their emotions an inconvenience, their true self an unlovable mess. So the prisoner becomes a master of preemptive accommodation. They anticipate the needs of others and meet them before being asked. They edit their conversations, stripping away any potential for disagreement or debate. They absorb blame that is not theirs to carry, because accepting fault is faster than navigating the turbulent waters of conflict. The goal is not merely to avoid angering others, but to eliminate the very possibility of it. They are trying to control the emotional weather of every room they enter, a futile, godlike task that leaves them perpetually drained. And then there is the loneliness. It is a profound, isolating loneliness that can be felt even in a crowd, even in the arms of a lover, because if they are loved for their performance, for their pleasantness, then they are not truly loved at all. They are loved for a character they play. The authentic self remains in solitary confinement, unseen and unknown. This creates a heartbreaking paradox. The very strategy they develop to secure connection has become the primary obstacle to ever experiencing it. They are surrounded by people who appreciate the facade, while the person inside starves for want of being truly seen. The harmony they work so hard to cultivate is a sterile one, the quiet of a desert, not the rich, vibrant silence of a forest. It is the sound of a self fading away. The turning point is never loud. It does not arrive with the slam of a door or a shouted declaration. It is a quiet internal rupture, so subtle it can almost be missed. It is the moment the system, perfected over a lifetime, finally fails under the weight of its own impossibility. It is a single, clear note of truth that rings in the silence and refuses to be swallowed. It happens on an ordinary Tuesday. A request is made, perhaps to take on an extra project, to attend a social event, to change a plan. It is a small thing, a pebble, but on this day the pebble is one too many. The body, exhausted from its constant state of alarm, sends a signal that finally breaks through the noise, a weariness so deep it feels like a physical law, or perhaps it is a sudden crystalline vision of the future, a vista of endless smiling compliance, a life lived entirely in the service of other people's calendars and expectations. And in that moment the cost of the harmony becomes greater than the terror of the conflict. The yes does not come, it sticks in the throat. Foreign body, what emerges in a voice that sounds strangely their own, is the first unspoken truth: no, or I can't, or I don't want to. The aftermath is not relief, not at first. It is a physiological and psychological earthquake. The body braces for impact. The heart hammers, expecting the sky to fall. The mind races, composing apologies, preparing to take it back, to explain it away. This is the moment of maximum resistance, where a lifetime of conditioning screams for a return to the old, familiar prison. But then a second passes, then another. The person on the other end of the phone might be disappointed, they might be surprised, but the world does not end, the floor does not open up. The love, if it was ever real, does not vanish. There is no cataclysm, there is only a response, a human reaction which they are forced to tolerate, to sit with, and in that sitting, something revolutionary occurs. They survive. This is the dawning realization. The catastrophe they had spent a lifetime avoiding was a phantom. The architecture of their fear was built to contain a storm that existed only. Memory, the parent whose disapproval once felt like a withdrawal of oxygen, has been replaced by other people, bosses, friends, partners, who are ultimately more resilient, more capable of handling a boundary than the childhood blueprint ever allowed them to believe. The no is not an act of aggression, it is an act of definition. It is the first line drawn in the sand around a self that is only just beginning to remember it exists. It is terrifying because it is new, not because it is dangerous. This first truth is rarely clean. It may be clumsy, accompanied by a shaky voice and a racing pulse. It may be followed by a wave of guilt so potent it feels like nausea, but it is a crack in the dam. Once the truth has been spoken, even once, the facade is no longer seamless. The prisoner has seen a glimpse of the world outside the walls, and having seen it, they can never fully believe in the necessity of the prison again. The blueprint, for the first time, has a tear in its paper. A new draft is possible. Healing is not an erasure. The old pathways, carved so deep into the neural landscape, do not simply vanish. They remain like overgrown trails in a forest, still passable but no longer the only route. The work is not to destroy the people-pleaser, but to gently retire it from its position of command. It is to build a new home for the psyche, one room at a time, on the stable ground of the authentic self. This is the slow, patient, and deeply courageous work of integration. It begins with the body, the faithful record keeper. Before the mind can formulate a yes or a no, the body holds the truth. A request is made, the breath catches Stomach clenches, this is the moment of choice. Instead of overriding the signal with a reflexive agreement, there is a pause, a hand might rest on the belly, a conscious breath is taken not to calm the reaction away, but to create space around it. I need to check. My calendar becomes a lifeline, a deliberate interruption of the automatic cycle. It is in these small somatic pauses that a new self is born. It is the practice of listening to the internal whisper before attending to the external demand. This new architecture is built with the bricks of small, sustainable boundaries. It is not about grand, confrontational declarations, but about tiny, almost invisible acts of self. Honor, it is ordering the meal you truly want, not the one you think will be least trouble. It is allowing a silence in a conversation to hang, without rushing to fill it with agreeable chatter. It is leaving a party when you are tired, not when you think it is acceptable to leave. Each of these acts is a message to the deepest self. You matter, your preferences are valid, your energy is precious. Over time, these messages accumulate, building a foundation of self-trust that can eventually bear the weight of larger no's. The most profound shift is the redefinition of generosity. The compulsive people pleaser is not generous, they are desperate. Their giving is a transaction aimed at purchasing safety and approval. True generosity, the kind that nourishes both the giver and the receiver, can only flow from a place of abundance. It requires a clear and functioning boundary, a defined self from which to give. It is the difference between a leak and a gift. The healing journey involves learning to discern the difference in the body. Does this act of giving feel expansive, or does it feel like a contraction? Does it come from a full heart or from a fearful one? The rediscovery of genuine generosity, free from the chains of obligation, is one of the great homecomings. And so the journey circles back, not to blame but to understanding. The parent who could only love conditionally was likely a prisoner in their own right, carrying blueprints from generations past. The work now is to become the parent one needed, to offer the self the unconditional regard that was once sought from others, to soothe the inner child's terror when a boundary is set, to celebrate the small, brave acts of authenticity. It is a quiet, ongoing conversation between the person you became to survive and the person you were always meant to be. The goal is not to become someone who never pleases others, but to become someone who has a choice. The final, quiet realization is that the very traits the people pleaser buried, the needs, the opinions, the messy humanity, were not liabilities. They were the missing pieces. They are what make a life, not a performance, and what emerges slowly is not a different person, but a more complete one. The reflection in the water finally grows still, and for the first time you recognize the face looking back.